A very good morning to all of you, and welcome to this class on Sydney's Apology for Poetry. And today we will start with Sydney's comments on the decline of contemporary English poetry and drama. Okay. Now, Sydney has pointed out in his apology for poetry that there are several reasons behind this decline of poetry and drama in his age, and he lists the reason. And number one of those reasons, which he pointed out, was that peaceful years have bred a tame and sluggish generation which is devoid of the ardent and generous spirits necessary for poetic creation. So Sydney says that for poetic creation, you need a very ardent and generous spirit. You need to be very active and powerful and charged up. But the time, actually Sydney's time, that is the when Elizabeth the First was on throne, that was a very peaceful time, and there was no political or social disturbance. And Sydney says that this peaceful generation has bred a tame and sluggish generation, which generation is actually devoid of any kind of ardent and generous spirit. Now, the next point which Sydney points out is that poets are base people and servile weeds, worldly and uninspired. Poetry requires genius, but genius was lacking in the age. Now he says that poets of his time, most of the poets, the contemporary poets, they were generally base people. So at the very beginning, when I was telling this, that this was what Sydney has said about poets, so this was just very contradictory. So Sydney is telling that poets are base people. No, the poets are not base people, but the poets of his time were not up to the mark or up to the level which a poet should have achieved to become a true poet. He says that the contemporary poets, most of the contemporary poets, were base people, and they have servile wits. Their wits are just very much they actually lack original genuine wit, and they have servile wit. They always want to copy others, want to imitate others, and they were very worldly and uninspired. So Sydney says that a poet should be inspired by the divine power. A poet should acquire the divine inspiration. The poet should know how to get the divine inspiration. But he says that the poets of his time were actually uninspired, and they were very base, very worldly, mundane. And then he says that actually a poet, for writing poetry, for creation, a poet requires what? Genius. And genius was lacking in the age of Sydney, that Sydney has said. Now then he says that there is a widespread ignorance of poetic art. Now the poets who were writing, they were not very much aware of the poetic art. And if you don't know the very grammar of poetry, if you don't know the very theories, if you lack the very idea of how poetry is created, then it is not possible for you to write poetry. That is what Sydney actually believed. Poets had neither knowledge nor imitation of sound model. They don't have a very good model in front of them, or they actually lack that power to follow a great poet of yore, and they actually lack knowledge, and they also lack the constant exercise or practice. So what Sydney actually wants to say is that poets of his time were actually lacking in knowledge, wit, originality, power, as well as the poetic inspiration. They were very worldly and uninspired, for which they could not create good poetry. They could not write good poetry. And this is what Sydney has said, that this actually helped, or this was actually instrumental for some Puritan people to write something bad against poetry, to criticize poetry. But Sidney wants to say that poetry is not responsible for that, but the people who are associated with poetry, they actually lack the power, or they actually lack to that ability to arrive, to attain that standard which is required for creating good poetry, for writing good poetry. That is what Sidney wants to say here. Now, then he goes on to discuss the problems with the contemporary tragedy, and what Sidney wanted to posit or establish at the, as true tragedy. Now, Sidney's conception of tragedy is a mixture of the medieval tradition and as well as the conception of Aristotle as interpreted by the Italian and French critics like Scaliger, Mintano, and Castelvetro. Now, Sidney's idea of tragedy was a combination of the medieval tradition and the concept that was propounded by Aristotle and which was interpreted by the French and Italian critics like Scaliger, Mintano, and Castelvetro. Now, following Scaliger, Sidney says, or he regards that the function of tragedy is what? It is admiration and commiseration. So, following Scaliger, Sidney says that the function of tragedy is what? It is admiration, to admire, and sympathy, pity and sympathy, that is commiseration. So, according to Sidney, following Scaliger, he says that the function of tragedy is admiration and commiseration. He also follows the medieval tradition. He not only follows what Scaliger has said following Aristotle, he also combines that with the medieval tradition of tragedy and says that tragedy should show the fall of the tyrants. So this is what actually the medieval tradition believed, that tragedy should show the fall of the tyrants. Following Castelvetro, Castelvetro was another critic. Following Castelvetro, he insists on the observance, very strict observance of unities, for which there is no such strong warrant in Aristotle. Aristotle mentioned about the maintenance of the three unities: the unity of time, unity of place, and in some places unity of action also. But Aristotle was never gave a warrant for this following, with strict following of this unities, the three unities. But Sidney says, following the tradition of following Castelvetro, that Castelvetro actually took up Aristotle's idea, but Aristotle was not very much strict about this follow, but Castelvetro said that these things should be followed very strictly. Tragedy requires the maintenance of unity of time, place, and action, and Sidney took that and said that yes, tragedy requires this maintenance of unity of action, unity of time, and unity of place. Now he condemns modern tragedy. Modern tragedy means the tragedy that was there in vogue during the time of Sidney. He condemns modern tragedy for the incongruous mingling of the tragic and the comic. So according to that, that was a gross violation. Sidney was against any kind of incongruity in the plot, that he was against the mixture, incongruous mixture of tragedy and comedy, and he was against that. He gave many examples of absurdities. Now Sidney in this essay actually gives examples of absurdities which was born out of this mixture of tragedy and comedy. He pours ridicule on the contemporary tragedy. The only tragedy he praises in this essay is God Bodak. Why? Because it has the elevated style and the proper eloquent language. Now Sidney actually praised the only tragedy, that is God Bodak. Why? Because of its elevated style and its eloquent language. But there he says that God Bodak also lacks the maintenance of the three unities, that is unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. He commends the examples of the ancients and advises the dramatists of his age to plunge directly into the very middle. That is, he always suggests, following the ancients, that a drama or a tragedy should begin in medias res. It should begin at the very middle, and the dramatist or the dramatist should present most of the informations not through representation but through reporting. The play will start at the very middle of the story, middle of the plot. It will start in medias res, and most of the informations should be given through reporting. Okay, he actually believes that true tragedy should be established on verisimilitude. But though Aristotle has permitted convicting improbabilities, so Aristotle said that we can infuse a little bit of improbability in tragedy, but that should be convicting. That should go very much with the very plot, and that should be very much convicting, that improbability. But Sidney was against any kind of improbability, whether it is convicting or not. So this strict attitude of Sidney, I think personally that was a sort of stumbling block in the way of later dramatic criticism also, because Sidney was a very important figure, and what Sidney has said about drama or said about contemporary tragedy, people took that very seriously. And when an important person becomes very strict, then what happens? It actually it stands in the way of further progress in any kind of thought or any kind of analysis or exploration. So Sidney's strict attitude actually it became a stumbling block in the way of the later dramatic criticism. Now, how Sidney condemned tragicomedy, that he regards, actually Sidney regards the mingling of the tragic and the comic as something very vile. He allows it in, though he says that in certain rare circumstances it can be allowed, but it should be avoided in most of the cases. That's what Sidney believes. Otherwise, he said that the mingling of tragicomedy should be avoided, because kings and clowns cannot be kept in one line, or you cannot mingle hornpipes with funerals. You cannot do that. That is what Sidney actually believed. Now, regarding contemporary comedy, Sidney gave a very interesting point at his conception on the difference between delight and laughter. So he condemns contemporary farcical comedy. Sidney was against farcical comedy, and he was in favor of the comedy of a more intelligent kind. So he says that comedy should have a sort of intelligent delight in it. He distinguishes between laughter and delight, and he says he confutes that the current notion, he was against the current notion that there could be no delight without laughter. He says that it is not necessary that for creating delight, you always need laughter. That is not the right thing. He was against it. He says that delight is something permanent and laughter is merely a scornful tickling. So delight is something which is permanent, and laughter is something which is created out of scornful tickling. So it is something which is associated with farce. So there is an instance of his originality. Now here we see that how Sidney has differentiated between delight and laughter, and he further points out that comedy should have nothing to do with painful deformity and things evil and vicious. So he says that there is a tendency to arouse laughter in the audience by representing something deformed or dealing with something evil or vicious, though that evil or vice is of less importance. It is not that much serious. But Sidney says that any kind of evil or any kind of vice should be avoided. It should not be used to arouse laughter, because then it will generate a sort of immorality in the minds of the audience. And he says that comedy should not deal with deformity, be it physical or mental or of any kind, and it should not deal with evil or vices. Okay, they may cause laughter. He says that if you deal with these things in comedy, they may cause laughter, but they cannot give you delight. So delight is something which is associated with higher kind of intellect and wit. The proper material for comedy, according to Sidney, are the weaknesses, follies and foibles of mankind of a harmless kind. So he says that comedy may deal with things like weaknesses, follies and foibles, but which are harmless. It should not be evil or vice of any kind. Regarding love poetry also, Sidney says that contemporary love poetry is equally degenerate. Now why? Because it is degenerate, because it is cold and unmoving. He says that love poetry is cold and unmoving. Its style is on it. He says that its style is on it and unnatural, entirely unsuitable for the expression of passion. So he says that the love poetry, or the poets dealing with love in their poetry, they use a language which is on it and unmoving, and they are not perfect for transporting, or the perfect for carrying the true expression and emotion of love. That is what Sidney believed about this contemporary love poetry. Now, regarding diction of contemporary poetry, Sidney also finds its fault. So he says that nowadays poets use far-fetched words and images. Now he says that poets use far-fetched words and images. Sidney was against that. Now he says that these poets are fond of puns and wordplay. So these all things also should be avoided. Now they write an ornate, pompous style. Their style is very ornate and pompous. Regarding the poetic diction of the contemporary poetry, this is what Sidney's observation, that they use far-fetched words and images. They are fond of puns and word plays, and their style is ornate and pompous, which instead of they do not clarify the ideas, but they actually bewilder the readers and confuse the readers. That is what Sidney believed, that this ornate pompous style and language and its overuse of puns and wordplays, actually they bewildered the readers, they confused the readers instead of clarifying the ideas to them. It does neither convince, that is what Sidney believed, nor persuade. So their language actually neither make the very theme of the poem convincing nor persuade, and they fail to persuade. They use art to show art. Now here, when you will be reading Eliot's Tradition and Individual Talent, you will see that Eliot is also suggesting something like this, that true art lies in concealing art. Art is true art, does not show art or does not show it off. True art lies in concealing art. True art lies in concealing art is what Sidney believed, and he has said that in Apology for Poetry. Now, this particular section now, which I will start, that is Sidney's comments on versification and where lies the superiority of English. Now, this is very important. Now, as regards versification, Sidney is of the view that the English language is superior to other continental languages. He says that English language is, regarding in the context of versification, English language is superior to other languages. How? Because it is fit for both the classical system of quantitative versification and the contemporary system of qualitative versification. So he says that the classical versification, that is the quantitative versification, English language can use that. It can fit into that quantitative versification, as well as it can also fit itself into the qualitative versification of the contemporary time. Similarly, they also have the caesura, or the breathing space in the middle, which neither the French nor the Italians, not the Spanish have. So English lines have the caesura, or the pause, the breathing pause at the middle, which you won't find in French or Italian or in Spanish. Now, he says that English is capable of all the three kinds of rhymes. So all the three kinds of rhyme means the male rhyme, the female rhyme, and the drusiola. Now, what is a male rhyme? That where only the last syllable of a word rhymes. That is a male rhyme. Now, English language can use that. Now, what is a female rhyme? Where the last two syllables of a word rhyme, that is the female rhyme. And drusiola is where the last three syllables of a word rhyme, that is a drusiola rhyme. So English language can it can use all these three types of rhyme: the male, the female, and the drusiola. Male is where only the last syllable of a word rhymes. The female is the last two syllables of a word rhymes, and they rhyme, and the Drusilla is the last three syllables of a word rhyme. That is a Drusilla. So English language can use both all these three types of rhyme. In his remarks on versification, Sidney showed the typical Renaissance concern with the problems of rhyme and meter. Now Sidney is just like other Renaissance thinkers, he was of the same belief regarding rhyme and meter, and he attempted to introduce the classical meters into English, because we have to remember that Sidney was a member of the Areopagus, a society which is a society of poet scholars. I have already said that in earlier class, with the professed aim of introducing classical meters into English. The Areopagus, they wanted to introduce classical meters in English, and Sidney, being the member of the Areopagus, he also wanted to introduce classical meters into English. So this is what are the basic outline of the essay. Now, what we can sum up in regarding this apology for poetry, that uh, he has established, he actually succeeded, Sidney, in establishing the superiority of poetry over other branches of learning. That is one. And has also shown that poetry both instructs and delights. So he was successful in establishing the superiority of poetry over other branches of light writing. Then he says that poetry has the power, the superiority. Where lies the superiority of poetry? That it has the power of both delight, of instructing and delighting the readers, and it delights by moving the readers. It instructs through delight, and it delights by moving the readers. With great skill, actually, but very skillfully, he has refuted the charges of the critics and proved them to be baseless. So what Gosson has brought as charges against poetry, very scientifically, very skillfully, he actually refuted, challenged the charges, and he has proved that these charges are baseless. Now, poets, he's believed that poets are inspired by divine fury, and poetry has a divine music. So he gives the definition of poetry, and besides that, he says that poets actually are inspired by divine fury, and poetry actually has the divine music, and it actually confers immortality upon its votaries. So those who are the worshippers of poetry, poetry make them immortal. That is what Sidney believed. Now every line of his apology actually brings out Sidney's exalted conceptions of poetry, and his faith on the power of poetry. So this is what Sidney has said in his apology for poetry, and what actually he has done in his apology for poetry. Thank you. Thanks for being with me. And if you have any question, you can give me a call. Thank you.